Good morning. Today we're going to be answering questions all about grades. Now, these typically come in a variety of forms. How can we calculate our grades? Maybe that's at the end of the semester when all is said and done, or maybe that's in the middle of the semester when there's still pieces remaining. I get variations like, what do I need to get on the final in order to reach this grade? Or if I want to boost my average by this much, what do I need to get on the next exam? So on and so forth. And I'll even throw in some tips about how you can use Excel to make these computations and calculations a lot more efficient. Now, there's probably two primary ways in which your grading system might be set up. And there might be others, but I'm going to cover the two major ones here today. The first is a percentage-based and the second is a points-based. And we'll talk about the percentage-based system first. A percentage-based system essentially takes different aspects of the grade, say something like homework or quizzes, maybe some exams, and a final, and assigns them each a percentage of the total score for the whole course. So for instance, we might say, make homework worth 20% of the grade, make quizzes worth 10% of the grade, make exam 1 worth 20% of the grade, exam 2 worth 20% of the grade, and the final worth 30% of the grade. Right, and so each thing that you're being evaluated on is given a percentage of the worth of the course. And so say if you do maybe 100% of the homework, if you complete your homework to 100%, then you'd get the full 20% worth from that. Say on the other hand, you only completed 50% of your homework, well, then you'd only get half of this 20%, and so you'd only get 10%. But what this allows us to do is it allows us to create a really nice formula for our final grade, right? And so we can say that our course grade is literally going to equal 20% of whatever our homework score is, and so I'll just label that H, plus 10% of whatever our quiz score average is, plus 20% of whatever our exam 1 score is, and I'll label that E1, plus 20% of whatever our exam 2 score is, which I'll label E2, and plus 30% of whatever our final is. And now what you should notice here is that all of these, if you were to add all of these up, sum to 100. And so if you were to insert your average scores for your homework, your quizzes, each of your exams, and your final, this formula would total up to 100. Now, it is important to note here that when we deal with percentages and we want to talk about working with them arithmetically, multiplying them, adding them, etc., we want to convert them into decimals. And so as a quick refresher, we can do that by sliding the decimal place over to the left by 2. So 20% now becomes the decimal 0.2. And so we can rewrite our formula as 0.2h plus 0.1q plus 0.2e1 plus 0.2e2 plus 0.3 F. And so at this point, to calculate your grade, what you would do is you would take your score for homework, for quizzes, for exam 1, exam 2, for the final, and you would plug in each of those values for H, Q, E1, E2, and F, respectively. And so let's make up some values here. We'll do a hypothetical example. Let's say maybe you did 60% of the homework. Your homework average was a 60%. Maybe you had a tough time with the quizzes and those were like 65% average, but you really studied hard for the exams. Maybe you got an 85 on the first one. Maybe you got a 91 on the second one. And then the final was pretty challenging, so maybe you got a 78 on the final. And so what we would do here is we would plug those values in for each of the variables, right? So now we have 0.2 times 60 plus 0.1 times 65 plus 0.2 times 85 plus 0.2 times 91 and plus 0.3 times 78. And so when you add all of these up and do the multiplication, this would then total to a 77.1. And so this would represent your final grade in this course, a 77.1%. Now, this is all well and good if you have all of your scores. But I think what many people tend to ask would be, what happens if you want to calculate an estimate of your grade, but you haven't finished yet, right? Maybe you're going into the final and you want to figure out where you stand. Well, this is where the percentage-based system becomes a little bit more challenging, but certainly still manageable, right? Because we still, for the most part, have this formula, except we just can't include the 0.3 times F, right? Because we don't have a score for the final yet. So let's say we're in almost exactly the same boat, 60% average on the homework, 65% average on the quizzes, exam 1, 85, exam 2, 91, but we have not taken the final exam, right? So in order to get an estimate of our grade, we're gonna need almost the same formula here, except we just can't include that 30% for the final. So we still are going to have our grade equal to 0.2 times H, because that's still worth 20%, plus 0.1 times Q, because quizzes are still worth 10, right? Plus 0.2 times E1 plus 0.2 times E2. Except here, since we're not including the final and we're only including these portions here, well, these portions here, 20 plus 10 plus 20 plus 20, only add up to 70%. And so we have to grade this out of 70%, right? So if we have our total current grade here, but it is out of 70%, when we say something like out of 70%, what we really mean is that we're going to have to divide by 70%, because that's now the total that we're taking this from. Right, and so we can do almost the same thing. Of course, once again, we have to remember that we want to rewrite a percentage as a decimal, and we'll do that by sliding our decimal places over by 2. And so here we'd have 0.2 times 60 in our example, plus 0.1 times 65, plus 0.2 times 85, plus 0.2 times 91, and all of this would then be divided by 70%, or in decimal form, 0.7. Right, and when we add all of this up and then divide by 0.7, we're going to get approximately 76.71. And so going into the final, our current grade in this example is a 76.71. And so that can give you a good picture of where you stand in terms of what is your grade right now based on whatever things you have done so far. But maybe you see something like 76.7 and aren't quite satisfied with that and might wonder, well, what would I then have to get on the final if I wanted to maybe bump that up to a B, right? What would I need to get on the final in order to receive X grade? That is a question that is perfectly suited for math to answer, right? Because we can boil that down to solving an equation, right? Because we still have this formula here. Right, this formula still represents our final grade. It's still how we calculate our final grade. And so we might know all of the values for, say, H, Q, E1, E2, and not know F yet. But if we want to say, what would it take for me to get a final grade of, say, an 80? Well, we can plug that in for our grade and then solve for F. Right, so if we wanted to find out what we needed on the final in order to get an 80, we might say, well, we want this to equal 80. And so in order to do that, we would have equal to 0.2 times 60 plus 0.1 times our 65 plus 0.2 times our 85 plus 0.2 times our 91 plus 0.3 times F. And this ultimately, we don't know it yet. We want to figure out what value it's going to take in order for us to get that 80, what value it's going to take in order for our final grade to equal 80. And so we'll solve. We can start to solve by simplifying both sides first, right? And so we'll have 80 is equal to 53.7 plus 0.3f when we add all of these up. If we then subtract 53.7 from both sides, that's going to give us 26.3 equal to 0.3 times f. And so if we divide by 0.3 to isolate f all by itself, that's going to give us f equal to 87.67. And so this tells us that if we want to reach an 80 for our final course grade, given these scores on all of our previous homework and quizzes and exams, we would need to earn an 87.67, or most likely round it up to an 88 on the final exam. And you could do the same thing if you wanted to figure out what it would take to get a B instead of a B minus. So you might plug in 82 instead of 80. Or if you want to figure out what it takes to get an A, you might plug in 90. But this process can be repeated, right? Solving for whatever you need to determine what you might need to get on the final to reach the grade that you're looking for, given the grades that you've gotten so far. Now, this can result in quite a bit of calculations and computations depending on what you're trying to do. So one thing that can be really helpful is to use a tool like Excel so that you can compute a number of different things really rapidly. And so you might come into Excel and create a table something like this, where each row is designated each portion of the grade. You have a column where you can input the value, right? This would be where we place like our 20% or our 10% and so on and so forth. And then a place for the average that you've earned, right? So here, to continue with our same example, here we might enter 60%, 65%, 85%, 91%, and 78%. And then we can use these values and the function and formula features of Excel in order to compute this a little more rapidly. Now, of course, we're going to want to use our same formula, except here, rather than typing out 0.2 or 0.1, we already have those percentage values entered here. We just have to make sure we convert them into decimals from percents. And so we might let this total equal to B2, or our 20, right, divided by 100, because we need to turn that into a percentage, times the value earned for homework, C2. And add to that the value of quizzes, the percentage of quizzes, divided by 100, times the average earned on quizzes, right? And we can keep going from here, plus the value from exam 1 divided by 100 to convert it from a percentage, times the score earned on exam 1. And so on and so forth until we've got all of them, and we can hit enter and see this computes our average, or our total score, of a 77.1, just like we saw when we computed it by hand. Now, an advantage of doing it this way would be that you can start to play around with the numbers, right? Say you didn't know what your final exam score was yet, and you wanted to figure out what it would take to get you a B, or maybe what would happen if I was able to get a 90, right? So if I got a 90 on the final exam, then you could see, oh, well, my total would be an 80.7, right? If I got a 95, well, then it's going to bump me up to an 82. You might ask, well, I only did 60% of the homework. I know I didn't do what I was supposed to do on that. How much of a difference could it have made if I, say, had done maybe 80% of the homework instead? Fill in an 80 here, and you see, wow, that bumps up a whole 4%, right? So that makes a really big difference. And you can start to play with these numbers and see how manipulating each of these scores would affect your final course grade. And so using Excel in this manner can be a really efficient way to play around with the numbers and do those computations really quickly. And so that's the gist of how you can work with the percentage-based system to calculate your grades, what you have so far, what you need, and so on. The next kind of major system that is used to evaluate or compute grades is known as the points-based system. And this is personally my preferred method because it keeps the calculations really straightforward and simple. But a points method, rather than assigning percent worth to each different piece of the course, you'll assign some number of points. For example, we might say something like homework is worth 150 points. Exam 1 is equal to 100 points. Exam 2 is worth 100, and so on and so forth. Maybe you have a project that's worth 50 and the final is worth 200. And this works really nicely because in order to compute your grade here, all you need to do is take the points that you've earned and divide it by the points available. And this is always true at any point in the semester, whether you've completed all of the portions of the grade or not, whether you've taken your final or not, whether you've submitted your project yet or not. This will always be true, right? So say if we earned 100 points of the homework, we got an 80 on the first exam, a 90 on the second, and a 75 on the third, and we got a 45 on the project, and maybe a 150 on the final. We could compute our total course grade by adding up all of those points that we've earned, right? So here our grade will be all of the points earned divided by the points available. So 100 plus 80 plus 90 plus 75 plus 45 plus 150, all divided by 150 plus 100 plus 100 plus 50 plus 200 for the points available. If we add up all of the points earned, that totals to 540. And if we add up all of the points available, that totals to 700. So when we do our division, 54 over 70 is equal to 77.1%. And so this can work as a really simple solution to calculate your grade. And this method will still work the same, even if, say, we haven't completed all of the portions of the grade, right? So if we considered that we might want to estimate our grade before we've taken the final, we can still apply the same idea. We'll add up all of the points earned. In this case, that's 100 plus 80 plus 90 plus 75 plus 45, and divide that by the points available, which in this case is still 150 plus 100 plus 100 plus 100 plus 50, but now we just don't include the 200 because we haven't taken the final yet. And so when we add these up, now we're taking 500 total points available, and we've earned a total of 390. And when we do this division, we'll see that we get 0.78 or 78%. And so in this case, prior to the final, this student would have a 78%. And again here, you might ask, well, then what would I need in order to get an 80, for instance, on the final exam? Well, we can still apply the same sort of process. Here we're going to need to solve for what that value is, but we still do have a formula that tells us our grade, right? We still have points earned, which would be 100 plus 80 plus 90 plus 75 plus 45 plus whatever we get on the final, which we'll call F, divided by the points available, which is the sum that we previously had plus that 200 points for the final. And if we wanted this to equal 80, right, we would set this equal to 0.8, right, because 0.8 is 80%, and then we'd solve for F. So we can take this whole sum on the bottom, right, this was now 390 plus F divided by 700, and we can multiply both sides by 700. So that's going to give us 390 plus F equal to 0.8 times 700. We can then subtract 390 from both sides, and that's going to give us F is equal to 0.8 times 700 minus 390, which gives us 161. Now, 161 might feel like a strange number, but remember, we're dealing in points. So 161 is 161 points out of 200, right? So we can convert that into a percentage by saying 161 points divided by 200 total points, which is equal to 0.805 or 80.5%. And so in order to get an 80 in the course, you would at this point need to get an 80.5%. We can also come back to Excel and set this up similarly to our percent-based system so we can compute these things more efficiently and play around with manipulating some of the variables in order to answer different questions about our grade. And so we might, once again, type each of our different categories and enter how many points each of those is worth, right? So 150, 100, 100, 100, 50, and 200. And then enter the points that were scored. And then in the total column, enter our formula, points earned over points available, in order to calculate our grade. And so we'll say equal, points earned in this case is going to be the sum of all of the points that we've earned, so everything that is in the scored column, divided by the sum of all of the points available, or everything that is in the value column. And once we've entered that equation, we can press enter, and then we see that we get our grade. Now you'll notice that this is written in terms of a decimal, 0.77, rather than a percent. So we might take this and say, multiply it by 100 as well, in order to get it to display as a percent. And now we have 77.1428571. And that's quite a messy decimal, so maybe we even want to take this one step further and round it up. Now there's a really nice feature for rounding in Excel. If you use the round function, open parentheses, enter inside the parentheses whatever it is that you're going to be rounding, and then say comma, however many digits you want to round to. So maybe we want to round to just the tenths place, so we'll put 1 digit. We can then hit enter and we get 77.1. If we wanted to maybe round it to the nearest whole number, we could say 0 decimal places, hit enter, and then it just gives us 77. But the round feature is sort of a nice way that you can clean up those numbers if you don't need all of the extra decimal places. I'll come back here and just put this at 2. But now once you have this, you can start to play around with your data a little bit. What would happen if we got 100 on the final? Well, then we'd have an 84, right? Let's go back. What would happen if, instead of doing 2/3 of the homework, we actually did all of the homework and we earned all 150 points? Well, that jumps our score up quite a bit to an 84. And so you can start to play around with these things here to see how each score that you earn affects your grade in the point system as well. All right. I know that was a lot of information all for one video, but I do hope you found this helpful. If there are any other grading systems out there that are not the percentage-based or not the points-based that you would like me to discuss, please let me know in the comments below, and I'll do my best to give a little bit more information about those as well. But otherwise, thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.